90% of the people are using AI wrong and they don't even know about it. Most of the users type a random question into tools like ChatGPT, get a generic response, and think that's all AI can do. But the real power of unlocking AI's true potential lies in the art of prompt engineering. It's the craft of designing inputs that can generate precise, creative, and business-ready outputs. I'm Huzefa, and welcome to Star Agile's YouTube channel. Today, we are doing hands-on with prompt engineering, where you'll learn how to turn bad prompts into great ones, use role prompting, chaining, and chain of thought reasoning, and also to learn A/B testing and debugging prompts for the best results. By the end of this session, you'll be able to build smarter AI applications from smart assistants to chatbots and never settle for generic AI outputs again. So let's get started. So let's begin by discussing what exactly is prompt engineering. As mentioned, it's the craft of designing inputs to get precise and business-ready outputs, right? So why exactly prompt engineering matters? The reason for that is all these large language models, they change their outputs significantly when you change your input instructions. Depending upon how accurate your prompt is, how much detail it contains, whether or not it has the context, whether or not it has the examples, or it has some constraints set, the outputs from those prompts will keep on changing. Here, we are going to discuss the different types of prompts, what are some of the best practices you must follow so that you get the best possible responses from any given model. Nowadays, most of the language models are extremely smart. So you do not need to overthink around how to create the best prompt. But still, the practices that we are going to discuss today will help you a lot when designing the best prompt for your suitable application. So the first example of a basic prompt is known as zero-shot prompting. In zero-shot prompting, the idea is to assume that the model knows what you are asking it to do, right? It might not be that the model already has been trained on that specific instruction, but you assume that the model will be able to understand what exactly you are asking it to do and do that task for you at that specific moment. Taking a very simple example, let's say you want your model to translate French into English. Now, the training data for that model might not have samples that contain the translation from English to French or vice versa. But assuming that the model has learned enough, it has enough context from the previous examples that it will be able to understand that you are asking it to translate some sentence A into a sentence B. And that's what zero-shot prompting is, in which you give an instruction and assume model knows how to take that instruction and perform the required task. Okay, so in zero-shot prompting, the idea is to assume model knows how to process the instruction. That's the key assumption of zero-shot prompting. And a lot of times that works. The only drawback of zero-shot prompting is that when your instructions becomes complicated, right? So it's not that generic for that model to understand. In such cases, you will not be getting the correct outputs. So in such examples wherein you are not able to get the best results from zero-shot prompting, people migrate to few-shot prompting. In few-shot prompts, you actually include some examples that allow model to understand how that specific instruction is supposed to be, executed. So taking the example of translations again, right? So imagine that you have a certain pair of translations between French to English or English to French. So when you write your instruction wherein you ask the model to translate English to French, you also include some examples, right? So you will say in English, let's say hello is translated to French as bonjour, right? So in this case, this is just a simple example, but in this example, you are telling the model that this is an English word, which in French translates to this resultant word. And similarly, once you include some examples, then you can give the exact sentence which you are supposed to translate into French, and then your model will be able to catch it up if your examples contain enough detail for it to learn the patterns. The third type is known as instruction prompting. In instruction prompting, you actually detail out step-by-step instructions which the model can follow to get your task done. A lot of times there are several tasks. Say for example, there is some information extraction task that you want your model to look at, and there are several information that the model can extract. But you, let's say, imagine there is a book, and from that book you need to extract, let's say, what are the key indices or what are the key topics that book is supposed to teach. So in that case, you can actually ask the model step-by-step instructions to get that task done. You can ask the model to look at first 4 or 5 pages. From those 5 pages, look at a title called table of contents. From those titled page, then extract all the titles that are present in that entire index and give a summary of that. So in this particular example, you actually lay down step-by-step instructions which your model needs to follow in order to complete the desired task. Right? And instruction prompting is also known as chaining of prompts, wherein you essentially lay down all the instructions one by one to get that specific task done. And lastly, we'll also talk about role prompting, in which you ask the model to behave as a certain individual. Say for example, you want a model to create recipes for certain restaurants. And depending upon which type of restaurant it is, let's say if the restaurant serves Asian cuisines, so you can ask the model to behave as a chef who has mastered the Asian style of cuisines. And depending on that, the model will start responding in that particular format. Not only that, if you want a model to generate scripts for a particular movie, or you want your model to write poems, you can actually assign role to the model that will make it think that it is supposed to behave as that specific professional before generating the outputs of that instruction. Without role prompting, sometimes the outputs cannot be in that specific tune that you want your model to output it. So with role prompting, the idea is to assign model roles using which it will generate more precise and more business ready outputs. Next up, we are going to start with doing some hands-on to understand what is a good prompt and what is a bad prompt. Right? So we'll start with some basic examples to understand the differences between a good and a bad prompt. For the purpose of this demonstration, we are going to be using Jupyter notebooks, and here we are going to use OpenAI and the models which are available to us by OpenAI for demonstrations for this particular session. Now, setting up OpenAI for your machines is fairly easy. The first and foremost thing that you need to keep in mind is to essentially create your own API secret key. How do you create an API key? Let me also show you that. So in order to create an API key, you first need to go to OpenAI's website, type out OpenAI API key, go to the first link on Google, which will redirect you to your page. Now here, currently I am signed in, but if you haven't created an account yet, simply sign up. You can use Google as your sign up account. And once you are signed up, here you will be redirected to a page which allows you to create your own API keys. In order to add a new key, create on this button here, type out any name that can allow you to quickly identify the key that you have just now created. And once done, you click on create secret key. Over here, it will show you the key that you are supposed to copy, because keep this thing in mind that once you copy this key from here and you close this window, you will not be able to see your key again, right? So here this key is displayed to you only for this particular moment. Once you are done copying it, it will go away. So you remember to copy your key at this point of time. Then go back and create an environment variable file in your system. So remember to create this .env file. This .env file is supposed to store your OpenAI key, right? Create this OpenAI key, paste your key that you have just now copied. I'm showing you my key, but don't worry, this will be revoked by the time this video is released. So in this particular case, you have to have an OpenAI API key created, which we will later use to set an environment variable. Okay, so this key is very, very important. So first set it up before running any OpenAI creations or any OpenAI chats here. So once done, you can come back to your notebook, install OpenAI package like using pip or conda, whatever package manager you guys use. And then you start importing your OpenAI. Second thing which we also need to do is we need to load our OpenAI API key into our environment variable, which OpenAI is automatically going to read in order to start the conversation between the LLM and our system machines. So then for doing that, we are going to use a package called .env. So this .env package, again, you can install it easily using pip. It's most commonly used for loading the environment variables present in these .env files. Why did I create a .env file? Because that practice allows you to hide your API key in a separate file and you do not need to expose it in your scripts as well. I could have very easily pasted that environment key inside my Python script, but that exposes a threat of leaking that to somebody else who is just now reading the code. The best practice there is to create an environment file, place your OpenAI API key there, and then use .env to load it into an environment variable in the backend. So that way you do not expose your API key to some third party. Now you are going to load the function. We are going to call the function load.env to load all of our environment variables, and here you can see it is going to output us true, which indicates that the environment variable has been successfully loaded. Next up, here we are going to create a client, or here we are going to ask OpenAI to create our conversations. So for doing that, I am going to define a simple function which will take a prompt as an input and it will process that prompt to OpenAI and return me a simple output. So let's define this function. And in this function, we are going to pass a prompt as an input. The first thing here is to actually use OpenAI. And here we are going to use the chat interface of OpenAI because we are doing a conversation with the backend model. So OpenAI.chat.completions.create. And then inside create, you are going to define what model you want to use. So in this particular case, the first thing is to tell OpenAI which model actually you are going to interact with. So in this case, we are going to use GPT-4o mini. And next up is to pass what message we want OpenAI to respond to. So in this case, for giving out our messages, we are going to use the messages attribute. And a messages is basically a dictionary, right? So a message is essentially a dictionary, and inside this dictionary, you basically create all the key value pairs that contain the list of messages that are going to OpenAI, right? So in this particular example, we are going to define our messages here. So sorry, it's not a dictionary. Just cut it at this point. I actually told something wrong, okay, but I'll continue from this point.
It's recording.
Yeah, it's recording. Yeah. The next attribute that we have to tell is the messages that we are sending to OpenAI. So messages contain a list of all the key value pairs that your model is supposed to respond to. So what key value pairs are assigned? So each key value pair is going to contain a role and a prompt, right? So in this particular case, let me first define a role, right? So a role is essentially what type of instruction you are sending it to a model. We are going to discuss role in detail in just a minute. For now, the role which we are setting is a user role because I am, as a user, is asking OpenAI to respond to a certain prompt, right? So therefore, the first thing is to define a role as a user because that is the default role that is supposed to be used. And then what is the content that you want to pass to this particular prompt or this particular instruction? So the instruction that we are asking the model to respond to is already defined above, which is essentially here in the prompt, right? And once this is done, we are going to next up set a couple of more parameters. The next parameter is basically to set up how many tokens we want in the output. Remember, if you do not set this parameter, the model will continue to respond until and unless it finds that the response is completed. Sometimes it is okay, but here for demonstration purposes, in order to keep the responses, to generate the responses a bit faster, I am going to set an upper limit on how many tokens are supposed to be generated here. Ideally, I am going to set it to 100, but you can keep a higher number in order to avoid, the sentences which are generated by the model to abruptly stop. So in this case, I am going to set this parameter of max completion tokens to 100 so that we have we generate the responses a little bit faster, but you can actually set it as an input here so that we can customize it in case we need some more completion tokens. Right, so I'll take whatever the input parameter has been passed here and let's set the default value of this to 100. And the next thing is to create the temperature, which is controlling what is the creativity that your model is supposed to have when generating the responses. A temperature of 0, as discussed in another video, clearly means that your model will always generate the same output if your instruction remains the same. It's a way to define the exact same output again and again from your model. So I'm going to set my temperature to 0 so that I'm getting the same responses back from the model every time I give an instruction to it. And finally, I'm going to return back the output that I'm getting from my model. So I'm going to say return response dot choices, and here the output can contain multiple choices, but here we are asking model to only output one single answer. So therefore the choices will take the first value from the choices, and from choices it contains the output within the message attribute, and then from message we'll get the content back using the content attribute. So this is basically the entire set of attributes you need to call in order to get the text out from the output of your large language model, which in this case, this is the context, or this is the syntax that you are supposed to use whenever you are working with OpenAI. So now our function is ready. Next up, we are ready to give some instructions to our model. First, always remember to avoid vague prompts. Vague prompts means that your instructions do not contain any context or examples or constraints when writing an instruction. So a very simple example of a vague prompt would look something like this. Right, so you can ask the model, tell me about dogs. So in this case, you are giving the model a very generic instruction, but you are not telling it what exact information do you want to know about dogs. What is the context that you want this information in, and what type of response you need to generate from it. Although the model will respond, but the output of this model will be a lot generic, right? So it will contain some generic details about what exactly dogs are. So when you write this prompt and you get a response back from the model, let's say what the output looks like. So I'm going to use the function that I have defined above, and then I'm going to pass the vague prompt as an input to this. We'll wait for a couple of seconds in order to get the response back, and let's quickly print it out. So now let's quickly see what the output of this vague prompt looks like. So for this, I'm going to print my vague output, and you can clearly see that this is what the model has responded with. So it says dogs, scientifically known as some species name, are animals that are considered one of humanity's oldest animals. So the general facts that you already know about dogs is what is generated. But on the other hand, let's take another variant of this prompt wherein we ask model to respond in a certain specific way. So in this case, let's take another example of a prompt wherein we are asking model a context and some constraint as well, so that model knows what type of instruction it is supposed to generate. So let's call this as better prompt. So in this case, we are going to ask this model to create a story about a dog, write about a dog, or let's call it a brave dog, for instance, who saves a child from danger. Okay. So in this particular case, we are asking the model to write about a brave dog who has saved a child from some danger. So the idea here is that you are asking model to respond for a certain situation, and you are giving model some context around what exact type of response it is supposed to generate. Previously, it was giving you some generic answer which it already knows, but here we are giving a context to the model which using which it will update its response. So let's use this better prompt now and see how the output of this particular instruction will look like. And let's print it out as well. And here you can see the output is a much more detailed instruction. The output is much more detailed, and it is in line with the type of context that you have set at the beginning. So here it says, once upon a time there was a town, there lived a brave dog named Max, and this particular dog was a retriever, right? And he belonged to a girl named Lily. And in this case, he continues to write the story wherein how it has saved that particular girl from some danger. Here the output is restricted because we have set the instruction to only generate 100 tokens maximum. But if you remove this limit, you will see that the instruction will be much more detailed and much more comprehensive. And that's the beauty of creating a more detailed and a more better instructed prompt, that the output that you get will be much better from the output that you generate from some vague instruction. And this model which we are using is a pretty smart model, because of which the vague output is still usable. If you use a model which is not as sophisticated as GPT-4o mini, which is a little bit older model, in that case you will see the output will be not usable at all, because that will be such a generic output that it doesn't make sense to include that in any responses. So make sure to keep your prompt as detailed as possible. We are going to see in structure what exactly we mean by creating a better prompt. Okay, so just to recap, in real world, prompt engineering is used around different domains. Right? You use prompt engineering to drive better chatbots. With a correct prompt, if you give that prompt a set a user type, then you will be able to generate much better responses from the same model. A better response means a better customer experience. If your model is able to identify what exact query your customer has and respond according to that query, the customer satisfaction score will automatically go up. Secondly, prompt engineering is also used for building AI assistants, tools that allow people to navigate through a certain set of application and things like that. And depending upon the usage, users can interact with that tool and improve the interaction efficiency between themselves and the AI tool. Third, these prompts are also used for improving your search queries. A lot of times when you use tools like ChatGPT, there is now option to browse through the entire web in order to answer for your queries. And how does AI do it? It takes your input instructions, tries to see whether or not your instructions are present in its knowledge base. If not, it then redirects your queries to tools that allow automatic searching across the web. It takes instructions from the web, compiles it, and gives you a much more accurate answer. And last, AI is also used, or prompts are also used for creating creative tools. Nowadays, people are using AI for almost all sorts of fields. Right? So from designing images, from creating stories, and much more. So these prompt engineering tools that are available out here, they allow you to curate an output depending upon what style you want to generate it. So to create a great prompt, what are the set of things that you have to remember? Starting off from the first important thing is to have a set of instructions. So as I mentioned, instructions are nothing but step-by-step detail of what exact thing you want your prompt to achieve. Without instruction, the model will start to debug that query by itself. It could be that it will deviate from what exact steps it needs to take in order to get the right answer. So make sure you keep your instructions precise and as detailed as possible so that the model can follow it and give the right answers to you. The second key thing of a great prompt is a context. As I mentioned previously, a context is nothing but what exact or why do you need that particular output to be present, right? So let me give you a simple example of where does that fit in. So talking about the context, let's say you give a model a task to summarize a certain document. Now, if you don't tell the model what type of document you are trying to summarize, the model might leave out critical details from that entire document before it has summarized it. So say you give a model a legal document and you ask the model to extract key legal aspects of that particular document so that you can summarize it for a presentation or something. Now, if you are not concise with your instruction, like, okay, the context of this document is that it's a legal document, then the model might not pick up on key instructions that are supposed to be part of your output. So make sure you set the context right when you are creating a prompt. The third set of key structure of a prompt is an example. As I mentioned previously, you can even create prompts in a zero-shot technique wherein you do not give any example to how that task is supposed to be completed. But on including some examples, the model will be able to follow that example and understand how it is supposed to get those entities out of that document. So examples allow your model to better curate its how to better curate its instructions so that it can give you the exact answer that you are supposed to get. Last but not the least, you can even set constraints which allow your model to output in a certain way. Say for example, you want to summarize your entire legal document, But here we also say that summarize in 10 bullet points. So here you are setting a constraint which tells your model the exact format in which the output is supposed to be generated. Without constraints, the model might generate outputs in whatever sense it desires to, right? So there is no limit into how the model can start generating the output. So with constraints, you ask the model to create an output in a certain specific way only. And there are certain best practices that we all follow, as I mentioned previously. The first is to be clear, right? Here you have to give the exact instruction that you have to take. Like, so in this case, you are summarizing the company, whatever company you want details about, in exactly 2 sentences. Second is to state your format of how exactly you want your output to look like, right? So in this case, you can ask the model to output in 3 bullet points. The third one, as I mentioned, is to give the context, right? So in this particular case, you need to translate to French, but what exactly you need to translate? You need to translate the sentence here which we are giving. The fourth one is to limit your responses. Now there are multiple ways of limiting your responses, right? Because a lot of times, if you do not tell the model the exact amount of data that it needs to generate, it might keep on generating text which otherwise would beat the purpose of tasks like summarization, right? So here, either you can tell the instruction itself that you generate the output in exactly 100 or 150 words, so that at the time of generation, the model is only creating those many number of tokens. Or you can even set constraints using the parameters that we have already discussed with OpenAI, wherein it will stop generation once that particular number of tokens have been created by that underlying model. And last, which is a very key important thing here, is to avoid biases in your instructions. A lot of times people ask instructions with an inherent bias in it. Meaning, imagine that you ask a question to a model saying that, tell me why remote work is bad. So here the bias that you are giving is that you are assuming that remote work is bad, and you want your model to validate that by giving you certain reasons around it. So this type of an instruction will tell the model that you need to tell me why this particular thing is good or why this particular thing is bad. So rather than creating prompts in such a way that introduce inherent biases in it, ask the model more neutral questions, such as, instead of asking why remote work is bad, you could ask, list the pros and cons of the remote work, in which the model can generate responses from both perspectives. Wherein one perspective is you need to list down all the good things about remote work and all the bad things that can happen with remote work. So these responses will be more accurate because you are not giving model to think from a certain angle alone. So keep these things in mind whenever you design any given prompt. And obviously there are certain pitfalls that people often fall into whenever they are creating prompts, and as I mentioned, they come from not following these best practices. The first one is that they create ambiguous, leading or biased prompts. Ambiguous prompts means that the prompts are pretty vague, like we exampled in just a second before. Or they are leading or biased, meaning they introduce some inherent bias in your instruction which make the model output in a certain way alone. Second is they create instructions which are overly broad or underspecified. Like you either ask too many things from the model to be done in one instruction, or you do not specify the enough instructions to get your desired output. So you need to have a balance between it. You cannot create too many steps in order to create an output. No, keep your prompts precise, not overly broad, neither under specific. Okay, keep it precise. So let's take a couple of examples further to understand how to implement these best practices when creating or generating a prompt. So here we are going to continue with the same notebook wherein we have practiced the previous vague prompts. And let's say the first component that we discussed about is to have a clear set of instruction. So imagine an instruction is nothing but what exactly you need to achieve. So say for example, you need a summary of a particular product. Let's say here, let's create an instruction prompt. And in this instruction prompt, you are asking the model to summarize a certain product. Let's say we'll keep the instruction precise, right? So we'll say summarize key features of iPhones, right? So in this particular case, the instruction that I'm giving the model, it's not vague, because here I'm asking the model what exactly it needs to do. But in order to keep it, or in order to make it much better, I'll also tell it in how many sentences or in how many words it needs to respond, right? So here I'll say summarize the key features of iPhone 15, let's say in 100 words. Right? So this is basically an instruction which is much more detailed and it's not vague at all. You are telling the model the context around what exactly it needs to summarize, and you can also set the constraints around it. Here we are saying that it needs to summarize it in exactly 100 words. But this instruction is much more detailed and much more precise. Right? So let's see how the output looks like. Okay, let's print it. And you will see that here it will basically display all the features that it has found out about iPhone 15. Right? So it's a series of phone with a sleek design and a durable iteration of, it has a titanium frame and a display quality and all those things. So whatever you see here, these are the key features of an iPhone 15 which users can actually use to purchase that phone. Right? So this is basically an example of what a good instruction prompt will look like. Second, we told about creating some context. So context is essentially, here also we created the context, but let's also see a prompt which has a much better context in order to get the right answer. So let's create a context prompt here, wherein we are going to define some context around what task we need to achieve. So whenever you write a context prompt which needs a detailed context, so give the context at the beginning itself, right? So imagine that here we want the model to summarize some legal document. So we'll tell the model that the below document is a legal contract between company A and company B, right? Summarize the contract in exactly 5 bullet points. Right? So this type of a prompt, here you are setting the context at the beginning, saying that the document that you are supposed to see next, right? So over here I have not passed a document, but here you can very easily create a string and then continue here by saying that okay, a couple of lines are added, and after that you can pass your contract text. So imagine that you have a contract text available, right? So that contract text is already presented to you in some file. You read that file and then I already have that example. Let me open it up, right? So let's say we create a contract text by opening. So here there's a file present in my system, which is present in. So let me use this policy called contract.txt. Okay, and I'm going to read the content of this file, right? And I'll essentially use it to basically, I'm going to open the file and read the content present in the file to create my contract. So once this particular contract has been created, let me show you what this contract looks like. Right, so this is a employee contract between two parties, right? So there are two parties which are involved in this particular contract. One is the company itself, and the second is the employee who is working for that company. And in this particular contract, you will see there are some details around the compensation and the bonuses and the leave policy and things like that. So what I want my model to do is basically I want to take the legal document which is presented in this contract and summarize it in, let's say, if not 5, let's say in 10 bullet points. Right? So we can increase how much of a summary this model is supposed to generate. Okay, and then once done, we can then take the response from this contract. We'll say get OpenAI response. We'll pass the context prompt here, and let's set the max completion tokens to 500. Okay, we'll allow the model to generate a little bit more number of tokens here. We'll wait for a couple of seconds to get the response back, and let's see what the output looks like. Let's print it. And you will see that the output now contains the exact details that were present in our instruction prompt, right? So here it says the position is a software engineer, the start date of this, the compensation includes the base salary, pay schedule bi-weekly, leave policy, employee can work remotely, benefits, and all those things. So whatever that contract contains, this prompt is able to, understand that you want the output to be present in 10 bullet points, and it's a legal contract between two parties, and you are supposed to answer these questions in those exact format itself. So this creates a much better and a much detailed prompt as compared to a more generic version wherein you just tell to summarize the details about this document in a certain way, right? So here you know exactly how much of an information you are going to get from the model, which you can use to later on use to summarize any particular document later on. And last but not the least is a technique of including examples within your prompts as well, right? So here you can create another prompt, let's call it an example prompt. And let's say here we ask the model to, again, let's say we create a simple prompt in which we are requesting model to translate a certain pair of sentences. Right? So here we are going to say translate the following English text to French. Right? Here that is the instruction. Here we are going to pass some examples that the model can use. So here we'll say in English, it's called hello, okay, which translates to French as bonjour. Let's say in English, there is a text called how are you, which in French translates to this, and so on and so forth. So as we include these couple of examples, and then we are going to ask the model to now translate good morning. To French. Okay, so I'll keep this instruction blank because in this particular case, you can see I have given it some context which says that you need to perform this task to translate English to French. Then I gave few examples of how this translation looks like, right? So there's an English sentence which translates to French in this manner, the second English sentence which translates to French in this manner, and then once these examples are done, then we ask the model to now translate our final sentence, which is good morning, into French. So let's create this prompt and see what the output looks like for this particular instruction. We can then print this example prompt. And you will now see that in this particular case, not example prompt, the example output. So here you will see good morning gets translated to French in that exact same fashion as the previous sentences got translated. Right? So that's basically how you can include examples within your instructions, which can allow model, or within your prompts, which can allow model to better understand what task you are trying to solve. Next up, we are going to talk about some key ways of defining, or essentially, what are some of the key ways in which you can create more better prompts. So here we are going to discuss 3 key techniques which people often use in order to get much better responses from their generic prompts. The first one is known as role prompting. So in role prompting, as I mentioned at the first here, the idea is to set some expertise, style or tone to your input prompt. So here you can ask model to behave in a certain way or to generate responses in a certain way. So you can tell model to behave as an HR manager, and you can ask it to write a formal email or a formal offer letter to a particular candidate. Or you can ask model to behave like Shakespeare and create poems in Shakespeare's own style. So in this way, you assign certain role, style or tone to a model or a prompt, using which the model will behave in that specific manner. The second technique is known as prompt chaining. In prompt chaining, it's similar to a detailed instruction prompt only, wherein you break your entire task into smaller steps and tell the model to follow those steps exactly one by one so that it can get the desired output back. Right? So that is what prompt chaining is, in which you break or detail your instructions into steps and then ask the model to follow those steps to get the answer. right? So in this particular case, again, we'll generate a project towards the end that is going to use prompt chaining as well in order to get the desired outputs. The third one is known as chain of thought reasoning. In chain of thought reasoning, you ask the model to reason step by step before generating a response. Say for example, you give a model a mathematical equation to solve. Now, if you give the model that exact equation without asking it to reason or think step by step, here we are not giving the model the instructions, right? So how it is supposed to solve it. The model will on itself will understand the question and it will generate the answer. But in order to do it, it has to break down that problem and think step by step. For example, if you give a model a question like a product costs $80, you need to apply 15% discounts and 5% sales tax, then you need to calculate what the final cost would be. So in this case, you ask the model to show the calculations also step by step. When you ask the model to include the calculations in your response, you will see that the output will be correct. Why? Because now the model will first create those steps. So when it creating those steps, it knows what's the output and input for each step, and then it will integrate those to get the right answers towards the end. So these are the three key techniques that people often use to make their prompts much more better. So let's try to see these in action, right? So we'll see a couple of examples of all these three techniques. So the first key thing that you can practice here is the idea of using role prompting. Now with OpenAI, there are multiple ways in which you can design role prompting, right? But here we are going to keep it simple, right? So we are going to assign the role as the part of our input prompt only, like as a part of our input prompt only. So let's see how that looks like. So here we are going to first create a prompt for demonstrating role prompt. So in this case, let's say we ask the model to behave like an HR manager. At a tech company, right? And here you are supposed to write a formal offer letter candidate offering them a software engineer position including a salary of, let's say in this case, $100K, start date of October 20th, 2025, and let's say all the other health and all the other health, or let's keep it simple, all the other benefits as well. So that is basically a prompt that we have designed. And in this particular prompt, we are asking the model to behave in a certain way, right? So in the prompt itself, we are asking the model to assign itself a role of an HR manager at a tech company. And you are supposed to then create an instruction. So this is basically what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to write a formal email to a candidate offering them a software engineering position. So the context is basically the offer letter should basically be for a software engineering role. And then there is some more constraints that we have set. Now here it needs to create a salary structure of 100,000 USD, a start date, and some health benefits that we can detail out if you want a more detailed instruction prompt. Okay, so now all that is needed to be done is basically get the response back. So let's keep it as role response. Get the OpenAI response here, and then we will pass the prompt that we have just now created. So in this particular demo, what will happen is that the output will now contain, let's print it. So here we have only taken the first 100 tokens from the output, but you can clearly see that the detailed is basically present there, right? So it has a subject created for the email, which is a job offer for a software engineering position. Then here we haven't given a candidate name, so it has created a placeholder for it. We can replace that with whoever the candidate is. And then in this case, it clearly states that this message finds you well. I am pleased to inform you that you'd like to offer you a position of whatever the company is, a role of software engineer. And we are impressed in all these details. And the position details are listed out here, start date and compensation and things like that. So although the response ended after 100 tokens, but if you continued it, you would be getting the complete email here. So that's the basic idea of role prompting, wherein you assign your prompt a role which your model is supposed to behave or use it to answer questions in that specific format. The second example is of prompt chaining, right? So in case of prompt chaining, the idea is to assign steps that the model is supposed to take in order to generate the output. So let's create a chained prompt. So in this chain prompt, the first thing is that we are assigning the steps that the model is supposed to follow in order to get the answer. So here we'll say the steps. So follow. So we'll first tell it to follow the below instructions step by step before generating the to get the final answer. Right, so we are basically asking the model to follow these step-by-step instructions before generating the final response. So let's define these steps. So let's say step 1. So here we'll say extract all the key requirements from the following job description. Right, so we have some job description that we want the model to analyze. Let's say here the job description looks something like this. So the job description is the role is of backend engineer. So job is of backend engineer, and then here it must requirements include Python, Docker, AWS, right, and should have a minimum experience 3 years of experience. Let's say in this case this is the first step, right? So the first step is to extract the key requirements, and then the second step is that based on these requirements I want the model to create, let's say, a list of 5 to 6 questions which are supposed to be prepared for such an interview, right? So then the second step is to create a list of 10 questions that are crucial for cracking this interview, right? So in this particular case I have basically designed a prompt. The first is to essentially to tell the model to follow the below instructions step by step. The first instruction is to analyze what the job description is. In this job description you tell the model to extract all the key requirements, and once it knows the key requirements, the second step is to create a list of 10 questions that can actually help us crack that specific interview, right? So let's create this chain prompt first and see how the model responds for this particular chained prompt. So now we have the response back. As always, let's print it to see the output. So in this particular case, you can see for step 1, it has extracted the key requirements. So you can see the position, skills, and the experience. Then it crafted these questions to help us understand. So although again, I limited the output to 100 tokens, but you can see that it's following those instructions step by step, and it is using those to actually create the response that I want to have. So in this particular case, you can see the first question is, can you describe your experiences with Python and how you used it in backend development? What are the key features of Docker and how do you utilize it in your previous environment or in your previous company? So you can continue with these questions, and you can use these questions to actually prepare for any given interview as well, right? So why not use AI to help you prepare for an interview by creating such prompts that can help you, make sure that all the key requirements that are present in that job description are taken care of before you enter an interview. Let's continue and also discuss the process of chain of thought reasoning as well, right? So let's create a third prompt, which is a chain of thought prompt. And for this particular prompt, let's create an instruction which says that, let's imagine that there's a product which costs $80, right? So there's a product that costs $80, And here we say if a customer gets a 15% discount and then pays 5% sales tax on the discounted price, what is their final bill amount? Right, so in this particular case, we are basically asking the model to answer the question, but in this case, you also tell the model to show the calculations, or here we'll say include the calculation steps in your response. So what this does is that it gives the model the specific instruction to output what steps are used in order to generate the final output, because you as a human being, what would you do? You would first take $80, you would apply a discount of 15% to get what the discounted price is, and then on top of it you would calculate whatever the sales tax is supposed to be added to that amount. So you also would calculate this in steps. So why not tell the model to also follow those steps when it will identify those steps by itself? I am not telling what steps it needs to take, but by just telling the model to include those steps in your response, it will output those steps for me, which in itself will allow the model to follow or tackle this question step by step rather than doing it in one shot without even going into the details of how this question is supposed to be solved. So then let's take the response back. So let's take COT response, and here we'll say get OpenAI response again for the chain of thought response. So we have the output, let's print it. Okay, so here you can see it has calculated the final bill amount after applying a 15% discount and adding a 5% sales tax by following these steps. So here these are the steps. So what it took, it first calculated the discount, which is the original price and the discount rate, and here, so again let's not limit the output here. Let's say max completion tokens is, for example, let's keep it to 500 this time. So now let's change the max completion tokens to 500 and see what the output looks like to get a more detailed response back. Right, so let's print it. And here you will see that in this particular case, it has detailed out what steps it has taken. So here you can see that it calculated the first what discount amount is, which is 15% of 80, which is 12. Then it subtracted that amount to calculate what the discounted price is. Then it took that discounted price and added 5% sales tax to it. So here 5% of 68 is 3.4, and then it added 3.4 to get the right answer that we are supposed to be answering back with. So in this case, the final bill amount is actually correct, which is 71.4, which is calculated in a step-by-step format, and the model outputs what is those steps that it takes in order to generate the final response that we are wanting to have. Right? So when you ask the model to include responses in your output, sometimes it can lead to more cost because you are outputting more tokens. But in situations where you feel that the response is not up to the mark and there are some cases or there are some edge cases that the model is missing, try to output the reasoning behind those logic as well. Right? So why is the model thinking that way? Tell it to output that along with the final response, and you will see that the response becomes much more better. So include this chain of thought reasoning in your responses to get much more accurate answers in the future. The next key thing that we have to discuss is essentially of prompt evaluation, because a lot of times we have different iterations of the prompt and would like to know which is the best prompt to use. Right? So in this particular case, there are multiple things that you need to look at. So is the output correct? Is it clear? Is it robust or not? Right? So in such cases, the best way to do it is to implement a simple A/B testing rule. And what the A/B testing rule is nothing but you create two different variations of the prompt A and prompt B. Get the output from both the prompts and compare the result to see which is the better prompt. And you keep on doing it until you get the final prompt that gives you the best possible answers. Right? And what you are going to see is that a lot of times between the prompts which are giving better inputs or better outputs, the previous prompt might have missed some steps, the formatting would be wrong, or the model is starting to hallucinate. So make sure that you avoid these common problems in a prompt and do not miss out on any detailed instruction step. Do not output a wrong format which the model does not know about, or do not include instructions which ask the model to hallucinate, right? So you tell the model something which it has no knowledge of, your instruction doesn't contain any knowledge about it, so the model will start hallucinating all it itself, right? So that's something that you have to keep in mind so that these common pitfalls can be avoided, right? So A/B testing is fairly simple. You create prompt A, prompt B, get the results from it and see which of the two prompts is doing much better. That's basically what A/B testing for this prompts looks like. And when you find certain issues coming in your prompt and you want to debug those quickly, there can be several things here that you can take. So again, if you are not getting the outputs correct, as I mentioned, be explicit. Rather than making the implicit assumption the model will understand it, don't make that basic assumption and be as explicit as possible. The second is that you can change your format of the prompt. So rather than giving the examples at the last, try to include examples at the top so that the model knows what task you are supposed to do, and then give the instructions on how the model can achieve that task. So you can rearrange your prompt structure so that the model gets to know a different purview of exactly what it needs to supposed to do. And last, as I mentioned, you can add some context or examples so that model can understand what exact task you are supposed to perform. So let's do a quick demo on how the A/B testing is supposed to be performed. Okay, so for the purpose of this demonstration, let's take an example wherein you get a demo, where you get a review about your restaurant, and you want a prompt such that it can summarize summarize that particular review for you for your better understanding. So let's create a review first, which you are going to use. So let's create a review here, and in this review, let's say I'm writing the restaurant was beautiful and but the service was slow and the food was served cold. I really like the desserts and strongly recommend the same, or let's say strongly recommend the cold coffee, something like that. Right, so in this case, let's create this particular review here, and what I will do is I'll create two versions of the prompt to check which prompt gives me the better answer. Right, and that's the usual way on how people also evaluate different prompts. You create different versions and see and check what the output looks like for these prompts. So we'll create the first prompt wherein it says, it's a simple prompt wherein, so the simple prompt which will go into say summarize the below review and we'll write the review here as well. Right, and then response 1 will, and let's also create the second prompt as well, and prompt 2 will basically say summarize the following review in good and bad points, right? And here we are going to pass the review about the which we want to summarize. So let's see, let's pass both of these reviews to a model, and the second review you can see we have asked the model, we have set a constraint to basically output what are the good things and what are the bad things presented in that particular review. Okay, so let's see the responses from both the models, right? So we'll say response 1 will be get OpenAI response from the review prompt 1. And let's also get the response 2, which is going to be get OpenAI response from prompt 2. Let's print both of these. Oh, not prompt, the responses. So here you can see for the first, you can see the output is containing all the things that you are supposed to ask. So it says the restaurant had a beautiful ambience, but the service was slow and the food was served cold. However, desserts were enjoyable and the cold coffee comes highly recommended. Right? So that's the first output. For the second one, you can see the output is much more detailed because here it clearly bifurcates what were the good things about and what are the bad things about your services. So the good things are the restaurant has a beautiful ambience, desserts are enjoyable, and the cold coffee comes highly recommended. But the bad points that the review contains are that the service was slow and the food was served cold. So obviously, when you are analyzing these reviews, it will be much better to get the reviews in a way which filters out what the good things are and what the bad things are. So if I was designing, I would have gone for the second prompt because it clearly bifurcates what are the goods and what are the bad things about the service that we are offering. And that's basically what A/B testing means, right? And you take different versions of the prompt, check the responses for those prompts, and pick up which is giving you more accurate and more reliable answers. So to conclude, we are going to build a simple project which is going to be an HR assistant, right? This HR assistant is going to answer the questions which employees have around their employment contract, right? So often when you join an organization, you might have certain questions around what is your leave policy, what's your payment structure, what's your annual bonus, right? What's your work from home policies and things like that. And here what we are going to do is, instead of waiting or redirecting these questions to a physical HR, we are going to build an HR assistant which can take the employment contract as an input and answer the questions which the people have in order to get the final answer. Okay, so here there are two things that we will do. The first step of this project will be to define the context, right? So here we are going to give the detailed employee contract as the knowledge base, because if you do not give the employee contract as a knowledge base, the model will not know where to answer the questions from. The first thing that we will do is we'll load a contract which the model will read and understand, okay, these are the things that it needs to answer. The second is it will take the employee's questions, and that questions that we are going to ask will be answered by the model directly, right? The third step is that we'll test the prompts and we'll evaluate and debug whether or not the answers that are generated by the model, those answers are correct or not. So let's implement this project in Python and see how it looks like. So first thing, as I mentioned, is that we first need to load the document. So previously I have already loaded that document. So if you remember, I had created a contract example. So over there we had already loaded an employee contract. So that is the contract that I'm going to use here, right? So I had loaded this contract text from the file present in my system. So I'm going to load it again in a variable which we are going to pass to a model to answer the questions about that. So here first let's load that. So I've already loaded it. So I'm just going to print it here so that we can read it once. So what was the name? Sorry. So it's contract underscore text. Okay. So here you can see the contract that we are loading here. It contains certain information. That is first what the contract company is, the start date and the position, the compensation, the leave policy, remote work policy, additional benefits, the code of conduct, and termination and notice. Right, so these are some of the things that basically are present in this entire contract that we have available. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a list of questions, right? So you can also define these questions yourself. And what these questions contain are basically the answers that I want to get about my work. Here, let's say we define a list of questions. So let's say the first question is, in this particular case, how many paid leaves do I get? The second question is, am I eligible for work from home? Let's say the third question is, what's the notice period for what's my notice period? That's it. So here we'll just say what's my notice period. Right. So let's keep these three questions And then what we are going to do is we are going to create a prompt that will take the context into account. So this HR assistant will basically load the prompt first, or in this case it will load the contract first, take these questions one by one and answer these questions for me so that I can respond back to these questions within the context that I have created. So let's create that. So here we'll create the prompt first. So in this prompt, let's define what the role this particular model is supposed to follow. Yeah. So here we are going to say you are a HR assistant, you are an HR manager or you are an HR assistant, right? Using the below employee contract, answer the following questions from the employee. Right? We'll also say if the contract doesn't answer or doesn't contain the information to answer the question, respond with I don't know about the same. So in this particular case, we are telling the model that we are assigning a role. So here we are doing a role prompting. Plus we are also telling the model the context. Then we say the constraints, right? So here one constraint is that if the first of all, the question have to be strictly answered from the information document. Second, we are also telling it that if you do not find the information from that document, you can respond back by saying, I don't know about that particular question. Okay. So in this case, that is the two things that we have. Then we are going to pass the two inputs for this model. The first input is going to be my employee contract. So here we already have created the contract above. So I'm just going to load that from above. Right. Contract text. And the second is basically the question that we want to answer. So here we have provided these questions. So we'll keep these questions here. Right. And yeah, so this prompt is created. And then simply what we have to do is we basically call the model to get the response back to see what the output looks like. So let's say here we'll ask the model like this. So let's see the answers as get OpenAI response to the prompt that we have defined above. And remember, here we are going to set the max completion tokens to a little bit high. Let's keep it to 1000 for example. And let's get the answers from the model. Let's print it. So here you can see for the three questions that we have answered, the first question was how many paid leaves do I get? So model knows that here you need to have 20 days of paid annual leaves. The second question, am I eligible from work from home? So contract says that yes, you are eligible from work from home for up to 3 days per week. And last is what's the notice period? Here the model says the notice period is 2 weeks of written notice. And these are three questions that we wanted to answer. And all these three questions you can clearly see that they were present in that particular contract. So let's also include a question that is not present, right? So how about including that question as well? So here in this particular case, let's say, do I get paternal leave, or how many days of paternal leave am I eligible for? Right, so I'm also including one more question in this list. Let's update my prompt and get the responses back. So in this case here it means, right, so here paternal leave is also available. So it says that it is 12 weeks of paid available for 1 year of service. So it had that information. So actually I got the response back from it. So let's say, yeah. So here we are going to say, let's ask a question around, in how many years will I get the opportunity to work on site? Right, so let's include one more question which I specifically know is that not available in this entire contract. And let's ask the model whether or not it can answer this particular question as well. So here you can see, since the fifth question is not part of my contract and the model has gotten a fixed instruction to basically make sure that it doesn't answer or hallucinate, right? So you have told the model not to hallucinate anything. If it is not finding the respective information from that contract, it is going to respond back with I don't know about the same. And that fifth question that we added was basically telling the model to not respond or hallucinate with unnecessary information. This is one of the best ways to prevent hallucinations as well. So make sure you keep instructions or edge cases on when the model can hallucinate when it is trying to answer those responses, and keep a certain structured response for all those default cases where the model is susceptible to hallucinations. Right? And that's all. Thank you very much. And that's how you can turn simple AI tools into smart, business-ready AI applications. If you found this session helpful, don't forget to hit the like, share, and subscribe to Star Agile's YouTube channel to get more insights into AI, tech, and project management. I'll see you in the next video. Till then, keep learning.